Hey guys, welcome back to Backwoods Unleashed. Today's video is going to be more of an informational video, kind of talking about the collar red and how it relates to bass fishing and during the spring transition and what you can expect from that. So, let's dive right into it. So the springtime is more of a magical time for this collar red. You'll start seeing people throw bright reds, kind of a California crawl, more of an orange with a red, different types of red all around the country. Doesn't matter if you're in Ohio, Florida, California, or Texas. Red can be very effective this time of year during the spring transition. Red is one of the best pre-spawn collars you can use in just about any lure for bass. Doesn't matter, soft plastic, hard baits, swim baits, spinner baits, crank baits, anything of the sorts. Red really gets them going in the springtime. So I know if you look across YouTube, there's a lot of different videos explaining why red is such a great collar. You'll see fishing examples, you'll see different people using all sorts of different baits. So in some of those videos, you're going to hear really, not going to hear why it really works. You're just going to know that it works. So today we're going to change that. And just like you've heard that pink soft plastic sometimes work, today we're really going to explain why those work and the science kind of behind why it attracts a lot of different fish during the spring transition. Okay, so now for the first reason of why red collar tends to work so well during the spring is actually because of crawfish. So in most of the southern parts of the United States, you have a crawfish that is known as a red swamp crawfish. So I'm going to put on screen right now the scientific name behind crayfish, and that is Cambarus sp, also known as crayfish to most Americans and most people in the southern states. So, how did the crayfish get this red and colored, brown, orange and colored tint on their shells most of the time? What they're going to do is during the winter months, they're going to really burrow into the clay or into the ground and make little canals and little tunnels, as you've all seen. But they're going to feed off these zooplankton that are in the clay, and the zooplankton actually absorb the nutrients from the clay. So as the crayfish are eating these zooplanktons, they're obtaining all the nutrients that the zooplankton have. So the zooplankton is getting all their coloration from, or the crayfish are getting all their coloration from the zooplankton, which are getting it from the clay, which is what's giving them that red and colored tint, because in more of the southern states, they have a red clay type of dirt. And in other states, you'll see more of a brown crayfish because the soil around there is more of a browning colored color. So that's how the crayfish get their tint. Now, one cool thing is actually, this is the exact same thing that happens to flamingos. In the wild, you will actually see a wild flamingo is typically consume shrimp, eat shrimp, and the shrimp will actually turn the flamingo pink in color. But if you look at a flamingo in a zoo, a lot of zoos will feed flamingo squid and different things that doesn't necessarily have this pink pigment. So most flamingos in zoos will actually be kind of a white and colored flamingo. Might have a hint of pink, but not fully turned to that pink color as you would normally think of. So that 50 to 55 degree water temp is that window where those crawfish start to come out. And so that's when your brightest red and colored baits are going to start to come into effect, and when they start to work really well is because the crayfish start to come out of the burrows, so the fish start to feed on those crayfish. So that is why they work so good. Now, bass may see different reds in a totally different view as us humans. We have a much more broader spectrum of colors that we can see as humans as bass do not have. So different reds may outperform other reds Being that said, bass may only be able to see certain reds at a certain depth. So, like at a 5 to 6 foot depth, depending on the water clarity, that's a thing that you got to keep in mind during fishing in the late winter and early spring is the water clarity, and to have a large quantity of bass that are moving up into the shallow waters to start spawning. If you have a huge mass of bass, more bass than normally is in the shallow water, then a lot of bait are in that area, and the bass are trying to eat them up before they start the spawning process. So if you use a different colored bait and that is red, it imitates more of that crawdad color, and you want to try to really hone in on which color red works more for you or better for you in your fishery, depending on what the bass are feeding on. So you might have to swap out and try a couple different ones. Now with reds, they tend to work really well in that springtime transition like we've been talking about and close to the spawn. But like other certain colors of different times of the year, once these bass have spawned, reds can be kind of non-existent, and with the crawdads already molting and not coming out, and the bass really feeding on them because there's so much bait around the shallow area that they're pushing up to get as these crawdads are coming out, the reds might start to not work as much. Similar things can be said for like people in Oklahoma who tend to paint their spinnerbaits, their blades, different colors of white and chartreuse and different bright colors. I just think generally more of accurate colors of the bait tend to work a lot better than the bright colors during late winter to early springtime fishing, because you have such a narrow window of when to use red that it's kind of hard to depend on it for your fishing net. So before we wrap up this video, I'm going to give you a couple examples of my top 3 different favorite fishing lures to use in this time of the year, kind of this pre-spawn time, kind of for this southern Indiana, Kentucky area, kind of the Midwest in general type of fisheries we have around here. Some of my few favorites. So the first one is going to be like a lipless crankbait. Now something like the Strike King Red Eye Shad, for example, something in that sort is designed to have more of a shimmy in it. And that is actually going to be something that I take advantage of a lot. And it's way of falling to where I'm kind of like fishing it, kind of like a yo-yo, where it's going up and down, up and down, up and down. I'm going to fish it kind of like that, to where the bait is just suspending and then floating down, and as it's coming down, it has a nice shimmy to it all the way down. So this gives it the effect of kind of like using a yo-yo. And I'm going to take advantage of this and throw it kind of on these grass outline edges of kind of close to these pre-spawn staging areas or the bedding locations, something that the bass might not be so far pushed up to spawn yet, but they might be just staging off from it, not really committed to it yet. Or I might catch a few post-spawn bass that have already went up and spawned and moving back out to catch to feed and gain their strength a little bit, so they're kind of just hanging out in these grass flats. So that's one place I'm going to take advantage of using a lipless crank or something with a nice shimmer as it goes down, and that's where I'm going to tend to throw it, around these grass edge lines and kind of run along these kind of drop-offs next to a spawning location. Now, one of my other favorite ways to catch some really cold bass, or bass that are starting to get fired up for the springtime, is a lipped crankbait, or just a crankbait. Not so much like a deep diver, but like a medium diver to like a square bill type deal, where it dives to about 2 to 5 feet. And what you're going to really do with this bait is it can be thrown over the bed, kind of next to it, along not so much the grass lines, but more of a drop off, where those bass are more than likely underneath that bait and are looking up at it. What you're going to do is cast it, but then you're going to burn it back, and then stop, and then burn it back, and then kind of just the start, stop, really reeling it in fast to draw their attention and then stop, and then more than likely on that next reel in where you're really burning it, they're really going to strike at it because it's really activating their attack sense, and they're really going to want to get it. So this is another one, good bait that does this. There's numerous of them, but you really like Berkeley's, Fritz, or different square bills. Guggen square bills do a pretty decent job with this. They have more of a tighter shimmy, but you can get one that has a really, really wobbly, wide action, and that does okay. But I tend to like the more tight wobble square bills for this, because you're really burning it back and really working on that kind of reaction strike from the bass. Now, something I'm going to tend to fish a little bit more this year, but fish for mostly the first part of the summer, maybe not so much dead summer where it's stupid hot. For the first part of spring is any type of chatterbait. This can be jackhammer. I know Strike King now has their Chatter King or something along that lines, whatever it's named. Guggen has something now. Just a chatterbait. It can be the original, like $4 chatterbait, $3, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be the $15 one. I know that the $15 one by the jackhammer tends to get up to speed a little bit faster, so you don't have to reel it in as much for the blade on the front of it to start wobbling. It'll just wobble right away, as that one it has to slowly climb and then it'll start wobbling. So that might be something that you might want to consider. But a chatterbait tends to be a good pickup. Like I said, you can get sort of bait in a fire crawl type collar, more of a red collar, if you want to try to throw it around the spawn and catch those spawning bass. It might get them fired up a little bit more and increase your chance. But then also just those artificial collars, kind of the white, your bluegill collars, something like that to match your bait fish, really does seem to work around that first pre-spawn to spawn spring transition. The jackhammer tends to do a good job. The original tends to do a good job. Chatterbait and different things like that are really something that you should look forward to using, because they really do provide another way of attracting the fish with the noise and the flash of the blades, and they work really well around those grass lines, so you can tend to use them more shallow and not get hung up as much as something like a spinner bait that has a few more blades, might get hung up a little bit more. The fish can really see it. It's kind of a bigger profile. You really only want to use that in like windy scenarios or something like that. But the chatterbait is a really good option for this springtime fishing. Now in this video we talked a lot about colder temperatures, different collars. I mean, that's what this video was about, to learn how to catch different fish fast during the early springtime, and what you should know about the collar red and why it plays a significant role, and how the crayfish and their movements essentially affect the bigger predators like the bass, and why the collar red is kind of useful to know and something to have in your arsenal, at least whenever you go out to fish. So I want to thank you guys so much for watching. If you want to see another video on my channel, it should be linked somewhere in the description below or in one of the cards, and I will see you guys in the next video.